Are they? Oh, hello. Right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lighthouse Books. And we're here tonight to talk with Emily Kenway. And just going to give you a brief bio. She is a writer, activist, and former policy advisor. And her first book was The Truth About Modern Slavery, which was acclaimed as a must-read for the entire left. So if you want a copy, we have some here. And we're here tonight, as I said, to talk about her second book, Who Cares? The Hidden Crisis of Caregiving and How We Solve It. It's a truly moving and powerfully argued book that is both a personal account of her experiences of caring for her mother and an incisively researched investigation into the current care crisis, both nationally and internationally. And it is also a call to action to change the way that we think about and undertake the care of our loved ones. And it is currently shortlisted for the 2023 Orwell Prize, which is really exciting. And yeah, can you all join me in welcoming Emily? So Emily's going to begin with a couple of short readings from the book.
Yeah, I wasn't anticipating having to hold a mic, so we'll see how this goes. Okay, so I'm going to read a bit from chapter 1. We are only ever temporarily well, temporarily able, and temporarily young. Accident, illness, and old age will be part of our lives at some point, in our own bodies and in those we love. It follows, then, that we should also expect to be caregivers. Care has many meanings. It's an ethic that suggests loving attention, and it's a verb that means both caring for, performing tasks and activities that look after someone's needs, and caring about, the emotions of love and affection you feel when someone is important to you. The two don't always go together, although we often assume they do. In these pages, we're concerned with a kind of care for which there is no single word in our vocabulary. We can see this when we consider statistics, articles, or political speeches on care in general. They often combine different forms. Parenting is lumped together with what I'll be calling caregiving, as shorthand for caring for someone who's unable to perform the tasks and activities of daily life without help, such as the elderly, impaired, or long-term unwell. Or general parenting is excluded, but they combine paid and unpaid caregiving, as if the experience of a paid care worker is equivalent to that of a wife caring for her ailing husband, a child caring for a mentally unwell father, or me caring for my mother. Every time you hear about paid care workers supplied by private companies, by the government, or by a mixture of the two, pay attention to what's not said, those invisible spaces between shifts where a family member is constantly on call, always the default, never able to define their own time. Who let the paid care worker into the house for their shift? Who called the local government or company to arrange the care in the first place? Numerous times during the process of researching and writing this book, people asked me what I meant when I said I was writing about caregivers. Did I mean care workers? Did I mean social care? Perhaps I meant the medical professions. Surely I was including general parenting as the paradigmatic caring relationship. No, I meant none of these things. I meant the wraith standing in the corner of the doctor's office or sitting late at night by the sick person's bed. The person hurrying between prescription collections and their own job, wondering when their life took such a turn and how. The individual who is no longer sure they are an individual, but has instead become an accessory to someone else's needs. I meant the person who didn't choose to become a caregiver and who must watch as the person for whom they care deteriorates over time despite their loving ministrations. I meant the millions of caregivers who were forgotten when governments were making priority lists for COVID-19 vaccinations, remembering to include essential workers, but forgetting the majority of those providing care, the quietly exhausted mass of caregivers. And it is the majority. Most care in the world today is provided by family and friends, not paid workers, even in wealthier countries with welfare states. Every time someone seemed confused about my topic, I understood the importance of writing about it. And I will do a little second one, which is, I thought I'd do a kind of a fun one. There's not a whole lot of fun in the book, but there are some moments. And this is in a chapter about family and reimagining the family to meet our needs. On a hot day in June 2021, I took a train and a bus from my London neighbourhood further north to find out about a different and better way of living. It wasn't supposed to be an especially warm day, but the English weather likes to surprise, and I was glad I'd chanced bare limbs as I sweated towards my destination. This journey was precious to me. I'd been voraciously researching ways of living in community. It had brought me to the Older Women's Co-housing Project, happily located in the same city as me, and I was on my way there, feeling my mum's presence with me, though she died months previously. From the outside, OWCH, the Older Women's Co-housing Project, pronounced ouch, looks like a normal, stylishly designed new complex of apartments. The estate itself, named New Ground due to its pioneering spirit, took years to plan and finally came into being in 2016 in a leafy area of Barnet's, North London. 25 brick apartments with handsome dark grey balconies overlook a shared central lawn with private gardens around its edge. There's also a shared co-house for communal gatherings, such as the weekly meal together, an occasional film club, or meetings about running Ouch in general. The project has received a slew of awards for its design and architecture. I was welcomed at the door by Maria Brenton, a charismatic expert on co-housing who supported Ouch to its realisation. We sat together with residents Jude and Charlotte, having tea and chit-chatting as I marvelled at the lovely gardens and learned about their way of life. The history of co-housing is rich, but hopefully poor in comparison to its future. Unlike communes or shared houses where everyone lives in the same home, co-housing is a blend of private dwellings with shared spaces, amenities, and governance. In 1987, a group of 9 single older women in Denmark established the first older people's co-housing arrangement. They took over a 5-story apartment block, turning the ground floor into common areas and the remainder into private dwellings. Their example spawned a movement. By 2000, there were over 100 such schemes across Denmark and more in Sweden, the Netherlands, Germany, and beyond. Co-housing allows people to choose a group with whom to live in proximity, sharing space and facilities that they collectively determine and control, while still having their own space. Unlike in many retirement villages or care homes, these needs are met by other community members, not outsourced to paid workers. This is a world away from sheltered housing in which many elderly and frail across the world find themselves living, where they don't have control over the resources they use nor the general management of the complex or services. This isn't to say that Ouch members are each other's caregivers per se. The women of Ouch are clear that they aren't and won't be. Their policy on the subject is the group undertakes to look out for each other rather than look after each other. While this creates a clear requirement for people who have acute care needs, I suspect it's also a product of what we think when we hear the words caregiver or care. Circumscribed within narrow concepts of the family, it comes to mean someone who does everything, often to the general detriment of their own life, and who is probably very overwhelmed and stressed. It's a concept that's also highly medicalized, thanks to the global trend for reducing the length of hospital stays. But probing further, the Ouch way of living means that a lot of caregiving does take place. We have health buddies, Charlotte tells me. She and the neighbouring women on each side of her have each other's house keys and family contacts. And she said, if I need anything in the middle of the night, I wouldn't hesitate to ring their doorbells. When Jude broke her arm, this way of living meant that there wasn't only one person who helped her, but many. And sometimes they've done rotas to provide sufficient support to one another. The shared resources of Ouch aren't only the common house or the central lawn, but also these acts of care.
Thanks very much for that. That's great. I mean, I have so many questions about this book, but I think maybe we should start from the co-housing thing, which is it's a solution to the problem that the family poses in terms of care, as in the expectations around care that stem from family structures and legislation, as you point out in the book, over the last sort of even maybe 100 years or so. Could you talk about what the expectation of care is within the family?
Yeah, so the family has traditionally been the kind of building block of care in our society, right? And that when I say family, I'm in that sense, it's a very narrow kind of family. It's, I could say, biolegal in the books. It's obviously biological, marital, adoptive, and so on. And that tends to be a very small unit that's been getting smaller and smaller over time. We're having fewer children. Lots of people don't have children at all now. So we have this incredibly fragile structure that also we know hasn't ever worked for lots of categories of people. And the amount of care we have needing to be performed is growing exponentially because of various diseases, longevity, and so on. So it's an equation that doesn't add up at all. And within that equation, we also have obviously a profound sexism, because historically it has been the women in the family who would provide care, you know, adult daughters being the kind of key caregivers as well as wives. And we still see this today with gender patterns of providing care. Of course, there are men caregivers, but they are the minority. And also when men do become carers, they tend to provide it in different ways to the way that women do care. So for example, it's so amazing how many people tell me this is happening in their family when I talk about it. Men will often do like the financial management that they can do whenever they want and doesn't actually interrupt the pattern of their lives, and women will tend to do the day-to-day practical stuff. Men will also tend to only care for their spouses, whereas women will care for a wider pool of relatives. So yeah, we basically have this very kind of traditional conception of a very narrow, very fragile, actually, family, which essentially reduces down to women as the kind of unit of care. And this doesn't work anymore, and certainly not in a world which would have gender justice.
Yeah, I mean, there was a really interesting. Oh, yeah, thank you. Sorry, Lara. You mentioned a really interesting idea by Nancy Fraser in the book, which is that this idea that we sort of view gender justice or a movement towards parity as women's lives looking more like men's lives. And Nancy Fraser and you suggest that actually the opposite would be a movement towards gender justice, that men's lives need to look more like women's lives.
Yeah, thanks for putting Nancy Fraser and me into phrase together. Like, that was nice. Yeah, so, you know, we have this, so I was very wary of doing the traditional white feminist argument about care, which we've, you know, had from kind of second wave feminism, which says we women should not be chained to the house, right? We should be allowed to go out into the world and make of our lives what we want and have the self-determination that men have as well, which has led to, with all due respect, a kind of politics that is women trying to become like men, right? So we want to outsource the care that we would otherwise have had to be doing unpaid at home to someone else. That someone else, by the way, is just other women, racialized, you know, underprivileged other women, and so that we can go to work like men, right? And so yeah, Nancy Fraser and I, it's how do you get past this thing of everyone trying to become this deeply flawed kind of patriarchal model to a model which is that everyone may have a sense of purpose they wish to pursue, which is ideally what work would be, and will have people they love and therefore people they need to provide care for. So everyone becoming both. And I think it's a kind of gender neutral viewpoint on care that loads of policies then flow from, you know. So I won't talk at length that it might come up, but in the workplace, you know, if all employers thought all their staff might have long periods of paid carers leave rather than just the women in their 30s, then we would have to have a very, very different approach to what we offer as entitlements in the workplace. And so just on that thing of the kind of white feminist narrative, what I really was really dedicated to doing in the relevant chapter in the book is that, yes, there are lots of women, I'm obviously one of them, who I guess had their like careers interrupted by care and were kind of, you know, like shocked and offended by that occurrence, right? Because we're not taught that. We're not taught your freedom is fragile. You are only free right now because someone you love is okay, and that's lucky. But there is an entirely other category of women who have never had the chance to care for their loved ones because they've had to be going to work for crap pay, right? So obviously talking about our entire care sector being staffed mainly by women of colour from poor countries in the global south. They don't have the fortune to sit at home with their mum, actually. So how do you create a future, a narrative that doesn't do one or the other, and that says there isn't a justice on care unless it's a justice for all women, not just white women at the expense of poorer racialized women?
Yeah, there was an amazing moment in the book where you are on a ward, and the woman opposite your mother has an infrequent visitor who you speak to and realize that she's a caregiver herself, a paid care worker, and therefore is unable to be with her daughter as frequently as you are with your mother in that environment. And I guess these chains of care, why do we keep choosing this as a solution? Why do we keep thinking, oh, I'll just delegate it to someone else and that will make it go away?
Yeah. So I think there's a deep psychological reason for that, and it's why there's an unlikely chapter in the book about psychology and care, which is not a norm for this topic. You know, there's no chapter about local authorities, but there's a chapter on psychology, because what the science tells us, and you know, arguably what common sense tells us if we pause to think about it, is that we fear illness and mortality and all these things. Of course we do. And so if you can tell yourself that that's not going to come and interrupt your life, especially in a, you know, a kind of career obsessed capitalist world where you're meant to constantly be on this particular trajectory, then that's a very comforting belief to hold until it comes to your own front door, which it will, you know. So I think that's the main reason that we try to pretend someone else will do it. And then we have that reinforced, like, consistently in media, in politics, on the left just as much as on the right. It's like a cross-political failing that everyone secretly thinks that someone else will do their care for them. And that's either there'll be a government service that will do it, right, a universal care service, or it's, you know, I'll pay for private carers to come and do it, or it's there will be Carebox. Basically, it's like the three options, and none of them are you. So you're safe because none of them are you.
Yeah, I'd love you to talk more about the Carebox. I looked at videos of the seal, Harrow the seal, but any of the Carebox, they're very interesting.
Yeah, so the tech chapter was probably the one I had the most fun researching. I was very fortunate to manage to track down someone in New York who was beta testing one of the most cutting edge ones that's now just come to market. It's called LEQ, ELLIQ, and she's a she. Everyone who meets her feels that she's a she, and I agree. She's sort of like about that tall from the stool, and kind of shaped like an upside down lampshade. And she's very like a Pixar character or Studio Ghibli. She moves in these really smooth, very like believably gestural ways, and she's basically an AI driven social robot. So where Alexa, for example, is command controlled, so if I say Alexa play the radio, she'll play the radio. LEQ is not just command controlled. She learns as she goes, and she proactively communicates with you. So she's being marketed as companionship and also as a kind of assistive device because she can give reminders for medication and stuff like that. Now, the woman who was beta testing her loved her, but it was one of those interviews, if there are other people in the room who do interviews for things, it was one of those interviews where you feel like there's an underlying narrative that you've not got to yet, and then it comes, and it sort of came near the end where she basically suddenly told me she used to have a human carer, paid carer, who she got on with really well, but the company kept docking the carer's pay because she'd get to Monica's house like 10 minutes late, so they'd dock her for that 10 minutes. The carer had like a 2-hour 2-bus journey, like she didn't have a car, she's in the US, etc. And even though she would overstay by the amount of time she was late, they'd still dock her pay every time, so she had to leave. And Monica felt like she couldn't replicate that bond, and she hadn't with any of the aides who'd come since, and she kind of didn't trust in the system anymore. And I felt like that was extremely telling for the conditions that make Carebox seem necessary, right, which is the conditions of paid care work. Japan is so into this, you know, spending millions and millions, and also kind of doing lots of press releases about how far ahead they are with it. They also have one of the most restrictive immigration policies. So they've got a dearth of care workers, loads of old people, like their population is aging like hell, and then for them, they don't think there's anything they can do. They have one there that is, I reckon you should go and look it up on YouTube, because it's the most annoying thing ever. It's called Pepper. It's white. It kind of looks like R2-D2 from Star Wars. It's like a humanoid, and it's got like a 13-year-old boy's voice, and it leads kind of exercises and games and does like witty repartee, but as like a 13-year-old would do, you know. It's like if a loved one puts you in a home with a pepper, they do not like you. Basically, there's loads of them. It is amazing and terrifying.
Actually, on the techification of kind of care, you mentioned another interview that you did with a woman who creates an app, kind of like the gig economy for care. You said like an Uber equivalent of care workers, and I wonder if that will be another trend that we're going to see, and if there's anything you have to say about that as a solution.
Yeah, there was a brilliant review of Who Cares recently, which was very nice, but it did imply that I'd promoted this thing, and I definitely did the opposite in the book. It's called Care.com. It's like Uber for care workers, basically. And some major corporates have put it into their like package of employee benefits, particularly during COVID. So I think Amazon might have been one of them, like it says in the book. But yeah, you get a certain number of like credits or hours or whatever from Care.com. And it's exactly this narrative that I try to kind of point out and like, you know, harangue us for in the book, which is that work is everything, therefore someone else has to do the care, right? Because those two things can't go together. So we marketize care to allow us to go into the market. And it's a really, I mean, on a practical level, so my understanding of care, and I think this is why the book seems to be liked across different political spaces, is it's rooted in the body. Like, I was a carer, I know what it looks like. So everything I'm saying plus research is coming from like the unflinching reality. There's nothing theoretical about it. And I can guarantee that something like Care.com serves the interests of employers, because they can say, but we've got you covered. Look, here you go, Care.com. And it will just make life hell for family caregivers, because there are always going to be emergencies. Who is the person you're sending to your, you know, disabled child or elderly mother or whatever? Especially if the person you're caring for can't advocate for themselves. That's absolutely terrifying. There's been lots of issues with an babysitting equivalent not having vetted people properly, and people with criminal records and stuff. But also just in my, you know, the book is about caregivers, not about care receivers. But being a care receiver and having strangers coming in and out, like that obviously should be hugely concerning. So basically, if you were an employee that was using Care.com, you would be just sitting at your desk, like really worried about what's actually going on at home, you know, and half the time no one would turn up, you need to go there. And it's just an absolute recipe for disaster on a practical level. And it also speaks very much to the kind of political dynamics that are in play, that whichever, say it's Amazon, whichever company it is that's, you know, giving this an employee benefits, well, how about just giving paid carers leave with job protection? You know, so someone can actually go and do what they need to do at home and still come back to their job. Why is that preferable? I used to say I couldn't get paid to be my mum's carer unless I went and signed up to a local care agency and got hired through them, and then she hired me, and then I'd get the shift pay. Like, what?
And yeah, I never even thought of that. It's ridiculous. So I guess we're talking at the moment a lot about the sticking plasters that people are suggesting to solve the crisis, the care crisis as it stands. I wonder if we could actually talk about the crisis. Like, what I guess from your interviews, what are people's daily experiences of care like on a global kind of scale, and what are the problems that people are facing endlessly? And
yeah, thank you. And before I answer this, I just want to say, like, I'll talk about the hardships to make them visible, not to suggest that like we shouldn't be providing care to people we love. Do you see what I mean? I wouldn't have wanted not to be with my mum for a lot of the time that I was with her, and it was horrifically hard. Both are true. So I mean, basically every area of life, care is bringing a crisis into for carers. Financially, obviously, people almost uniformly reduce their hours or entirely leave their job. In the UK, they can get carers allowance, which is £76.75 a week. And that's like about £100 less than statutory maternity pay, for example, just as a comparator. It's very strange. It's a hangover from when it was assumed women didn't need to have an income and therefore they'd be dependent on a man. So in 1975, that was the first time we introduced carers allowance. And then it was available to single women and men who were carers, but not married women, because it was assumed they just lived off their husband. So it's a hangover from that. Okay, so financially, it's absolutely, devastates people. And I'm obviously younger than a lot of people are when they care for a parent, but a lot of carers are older and it kills people's pensions. So what we're actually doing is, if you think in your life of anyone who's in their 50s and 60s who might be reducing working hours because they're caring, they may really face old age poverty, which is absolutely terrifying. How will they pay for the care they need? Right? It's a nightmare. Social and romantic lives get absolutely ruined, and this is a really serious point, because when you're a carer, you experience something called role engulfment in social science stuff, but it becomes everything that you are, and you feel like you don't have a self anymore. If you go on carers forums, there are loads of Facebook groups. There's a Carers UK forum you can read. People are just saying, like, I don't know if I exist anymore. Like, I haven't done anything that felt like it was about me for so long. And they're day to day facing something very, very difficult, especially if they're with someone terminally ill. But also, people can live for a long time with things like dementia, and that can be really hard. Marriages, 80% of people surveyed in one survey in the US said that their marriage had come under strain because of being a carer, and 25% got divorced because of it. Loads of my interviewees had difficult situations with romantic relationships and just them not being supported. Friends don't invite you to things, you can't go to things, and so on. So you become incredibly isolated, and a lot of carers are lone carers as well. So your whole life is just kind of taken away from you, really. And then mental health, it goes without saying, given what I've just said, that caregivers are statistically more likely to suffer from anxiety and depression than people who are not. Health-wise, there's practical things like good luck trying to go to a doctor's appointment for yourself when you're looking after someone, especially in the UK with how hard it is to get a doctor's appointment. But also, they have higher rates of diabetes, heart disease, cholesterol, higher markers of infections and inflammation, so worse immune systems, and horrifically higher mortality rate. So what I say in the book is, like, it's a crisis that's always talked about as something in Holyrood or Westminster, or a kind of very technocratic, like, local authority issue. And of course, in some ways it is that, but it's also deeply personal. It's behind front doors on your street right now. People right now are having all of these things happen in their life. And it's quite strange to have been through that and to know it's coming to lots of my peers, and to be trying to warn people of that, because this is why we have to make change.
You talk really interestingly about love in the book, and about how somehow at points that's invisibilized within the reason people would choose to care for loved ones, and at the same time it's also turned into obligation, and how that's quite thorny and difficult to navigate as a carer.
Yeah. So when I was writing the book and it's sort of coming out into the world, I was like, there are some risks I'm taking. Talking about care as being performed because of love can get accused of talking about, like, well, it's just natural, it's your obligation, be like, pipe down and get on with it. That's obviously not what I'm saying. But there is something very strange that's happened with this whole mindset that we talked about, where people sort of assume someone else will do it. And with our kind of work-centric socioeconomic mindset, where we don't have a right to be with a sick loved one. In the UK, if any of you have someone you love who unfortunately becomes terminally ill, you do not have a right to leave work to spend however long you need to with that person, you will not be paid to do so. There are countries where that's not true, but in the UK, you've got nothing, as if it doesn't happen, right? So we need to start from the place where it is welcome that people might want to care for their loved ones, but it is not welcome under the terms that are currently in place. How do you support and enable that practice of love, caregiving, to happen? And it's one of several reasons why I say it doesn't matter what system we have to provide paid care support, right? The universal care service, which obviously is a part of the Scottish policy currently, like being brought in, or in the US, like insurance-based paid private carers, any of whatever you do, family/friends, which to me is the same thing, will always be part of providing care. Partly because they love people and they want to be with them, maybe not as much as they have to be at the moment, you know, maybe not without an income, but they do want to be there. Partly because bodies are really erratic. And so if you're dealing with someone who's sick, mentally or physically, you will not be able to have the degree of planability to have paid care always there when you need it. It's not possible. And anyone who's been a carer, I think, knows this, that it's not in and out possible. Thirdly, because people who need care are also people and therefore have preferences and may not want this paid person to come in. If you read the research or join any carers groups, you will hear about 75% of the time that their loved one didn't want the support that they wanted to draft in to ease the pressure. My mum was one of those people. I know so many people that's happened to, and it's uniformly throughout the social scientific research as well. It's very ableist to assume that you can just be like, let's collectivize care and put everyone in a day center. I mean, what are you talking about there? People need care of all ages. You know, are you saying that, you know, a 5-year-old with various syndromes and a 75-year-old with dementia and my mum age 60 would not have been impressed by that idea? You know, it's something that gets forgotten a lot. So that there are a number of reasons why family and friend caregivers are always needed, and one of them is love. And my question is, if we start from the point that we love people, humans have breakable bodies, therefore we have to provide care, what do we then design? And that's really what I'm trying to say in the book.
Yeah, so I guess the question, and then what's great is that actually you offer solutions, or ideas for how to solve the problem, because often people point out a problem and don't try to think about solutions to what are the solutions that you put forward to this huge problem.
I shouldn't have ended on that question, should I? Like, what do we do? Yeah, so what I try to do is like chart a pathway, I suppose, like a pathway with particular principles, and other words we're going to repeat. And so I think at the crux of it, this is how I've distilled it in my mind, is that at the moment we have this mindset about care that it's a sector. People actually keep introducing me to things, not here obviously, but as like has written a book on the care sector. I'm like, what does that mean? You know, I mean, in terms of, I love words. So in terms of actual wording, it's like something that's sectioned off, right? Something that's divisible from the whole. It's not of the whole. It's more of that, it's over there thing. It's the care sector. It's not in your own home. There are some feminist theorists called Joan Tronto and Berenice Fisher who say we should understand care as a species activity. And I love this. Not because it's saying, you know, it's natural, do it, get on with it, but saying it's fundamental. We need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to care. And so from that point, I try to show a way forward that puts care at the heart of our arrangements in a supported way. And so there's some really obvious practical ones that are probably familiar to people around the work world. So normalizing part-time work. If everybody needs to provide care at regular points throughout their life, or is sick, right, then obviously we can't all be working full-time. It doesn't make any sense. We can't penalize people financially for the fact that they're human and they care about people. And we could do that, you know. I'm sure people in here are aware of successful 4-day week trials that have taken place for going down to 4 days a week without docking pay. I would like to see that across sector, across class. No good if it's just white knowledge workers. We also need to have a livable carer's income when you're not at work. That's fairly obvious. It's completely it is completely insane, you know, that we're pushing people into poverty, especially, I should say, if people are going through a bereavement in that time. You know, my mum died relatively young, and so she hadn't used any of her pension. So I didn't need to go back to work immediately, but I cannot imagine how I would have done physically. And I feel so much for people who get, you know, the gift of 5 days off from their employer or whatever. I don't know how people do it. So there's these kind of obvious things that we need in the work world that come from the stance that is the opposite of the kind of rational economic actor man who has no ties, the Mad Men style men. But broader than that, I talk about the need to create a commons of care, right? This is the kind of idea the book builds to. And what that means is, you might be familiar with, some of you might be very familiar with this, obviously, but you may be familiar with the idea of the commons as kind of grazing ground, right? Like historical, you've got a patch of grass, everyone's got sheep in here, we all sometimes graze our sheep on that grass, and together we collectively steward that grass as well to make sure it doesn't go barren. So this is the commons. And so it's an idea about having a shared resource and collectively stewarding that shared resource. It's both parts, not just the grass, it's our activity around the grass as well. In care, what does that mean? Well, as someone who's been a carer, I'm not talking about anything fluffy when I say care. I'm talking about real, tangible, practical actions. Yes, they have emotions attached, but they are actually like real things that you have to do. And I think that those are the blades of grass, right? So in a practical sense, you need to, you know, take someone's hospital appointment. You need someone to watch the person who might have a fall while you try to go to the supermarket. You need to do all of these things. That is what care is constituted of. When we hear the word, we don't, unless we've been there, understand how to break it down. So if we have this commons of care, it's about creating these collective networks around ourselves that can all pitch in when times are needed, right? And begin this practice called generalized reciprocity, which is where I give to you without the expectation of a transactional return anytime soon / ever, right? That's what we do with our family. Like, you do something for your biological family if you get along with them and have them. And you don't expect them to, like, next week be like, oh, please let me do this for you so I can make up for the horrible favor I asked, right? So it's about learning that practice of creating these networks of collective care, because we are all humans and we all need it. In the book, I say we need to learn the art of kinning, right? To kin. Family is a very static concept. To kin, I have made it up, yes, is a verb, an active process of creating those bonds intentionally. And that's at the personal level, but we can go to, you know, a neighborhood level of, like, where are those mutual aid groups that got set up during COVID? Why did we only have the guts to be vulnerable when there was a terrifying virus everywhere? You know, why do my area, I live down in New Haven, has a neighborhood watch, but it doesn't have like a collective care network, which is odd, right? Because that says a lot about priorities. But at it to be, or not solely that.
Yeah, well, so we're just about to open up to audience questions. So I'm going to ask one more quick question, and you can sort of think about whether you have a question for Emily. And I guess my last question is a kind of fluffy one, but do you see reasons for hope currently as things stand? Are there things like, I guess, the mutual aid groups that came up in COVID-19 that make you think we can do this?
Yes and no. So the no part I'll do first, because we want to end on high, don't we? The no part is that I'm going through this weird experience of having the book out, right? And generally, this is a different event, I'd say, to the other ones I've been to age-wise, but generally I'm mainly getting a lot of older people who've been carers who are caring for someone they love. It's like it's hit their lives. They're me, but they happen to be a lot older, right? And so that's my no, is that like people don't think this is about them, and they see a wheelchair on the cover and they think that's not about me if that's not been part of their life. And it is those people that if you read the book, I'm almost rude in places. It is those people that I'm really saying, like kind of shaking with my words and saying like, pay attention to this. A, you're going to want to because it's coming, and B, because we're drowning, so you have to. So that's my no. But my yes is, yeah, I mean, like loads of the things that I outline in the book, there are the beginnings of them, you know, these 4-day week trials. So the book's out in the US now as well, so I've been having to get my brain across US policy. I might need help from some point again. But you know, Biden is talking repeatedly about the need for paid leave from work for all carers, and they've got this new national strategy for caregivers and all of this kind of stuff. So there are things being said. Having worked with Westminster policy for a while before I moved up here, I know that that's not the same as things being done. And for me, probably because I did do that kind of work, and you know, Priti Patel was Home Secretary and it wasn't ideal. My main thing really is, what can we do now on the ground in our own communities? Like that is what I think we have the potential and the power for change. And it means like it does actually mean each of us, you know. And I have had people coming up to me after talks and being like, oh, I was thinking of setting up a WhatsApp group for my road, but I'm going to do it now. And actually that does matter, you know, because if you do that and there's enough offers of things, exchanges of things, then actually when something more serious is happening, you may feel able to reach out and you start to learn the vocabulary of need, which we are very afraid of. So I think there are lots of causes for hope, but it does require all of us to know we're part of it, and to bring other people who think they're not into it as well by buying them the book.
So a question from online, but I don't know if anyone in the room can actually read it. And then would you repeat it into the mic? Yeah. Okay, so the question from Mona: was there anything that anyone around you offered practically or emotionally in your work or in your personal life that actually made a difference to your experience as a carer?
Okay, just repeating this question from Mona online, which is, was there anything that anyone offered in your work or personal life, emotional or otherwise, that helped? Yes.
That's a good question. I feel like, I mean, yeah, of course, there were colleagues who were really wonderful at points. I'd say that was more at like the flashpoints, the kind of emergencies, and people find it quite hard to understand when something's just sort of going on for ages and ages. But I was grateful, you know, for that. Actually, yeah, I mean, I had a birthday like 3 years into it, and my mum forgot, which was not the norm, obviously. She was a single mum as well, so that's like my parent remembering my birthday, and that gutted me, and my colleague turned up with a cake, which was a like beautiful moment. One thing in all seriousness I would say is people just often don't ask you how you are when you're a carer. And I think, I don't know if Mona, you're interested in like what can you do if you know someone who's a carer, but I think that, yeah, you just don't get asked it. You get asked, how is your mum, how is the person you're looking after, but you almost never get asked, how are you? And I mean, I do remember the only time someone asked me that in about 4 years. And so I think just understanding that they're exactly the same as you and this thing's been thrown into their life is the starting point. Yeah, I did have people offer to do practical things for me a little bit further down the line, and I think that was really helpful as well. I didn't often take them up on it because honestly everything just felt too hectic for me to get my head around it, but I think that that's one of the most important things that you can do is like, can you stock someone's fridge with like frozen meals or something, because you know they probably aren't managing to like look after themselves properly. Can you go and sit with whoever it is they're looking after for a couple of hours so that that person can just be outside slowly? Like anyone who in here who's a carer knows why I'm saying slowly. So like these kinds of things can be really helpful, but we do need to do a lot more on like educating people about how to be supportive to each other.
Does anyone else have any questions in the room?
You were talking at the end about kind of finding the language for care, and like how, yeah, I think that's what we're talking about in terms of like us learning not what we need, but people. There's almost like in my head, like how do we get about a language barrier or a cultural barrier, and where specific words or phrases are often only kind of subjected or used with women, for example. And yeah, I guess like how do we start thinking about this cross-culturally?
Yeah, I mean the cross-cultural point is a really important one. I deliberately have interviewees from very different cultures to the UK or US in the book, and explored what's going on in the global south a lot. And it was really interesting to me that a lot of the time there's a kind of assumption that because it's families that really do it in a lot of countries that have no welfare state or whatever, that the women, it's like just what they expect and therefore it's fine. And actually it's exactly the same as here. It's like, I wouldn't have wanted to not care for my mum, but I needed loads more support, and they basically say the exact same thing in every country. It's just that the issues affecting them financially and so on are much worse. So yeah, it felt really important to include that in there. I think it's work that all of us kind of have to do ourselves and then model as behavior, honestly. And I think it is a cultural thing, a fear of being needy. Like capitalism doesn't welcome that, right? It's like I have a bit in the book about like this like pathologization of neediness, and even the dictionary definition of needy is like a really negative phrase, as if we aren't all incredibly needy in lots of ways, right? Why were we also having a little freak out during the pandemic when we couldn't see people if we didn't need anything? It's completely ridiculous, So I think we need to kind of revolutionize our understanding of ourselves as people that have needs, and simultaneously know how to set boundaries, which I think is some of the most important work any of us can do. But why I say that is, if you create these kinning structures, these collective care networks, whatever you want to call it, people fear them because they fear that they don't know how to say no to something someone else asks, or that they'll get themselves into something that they can't actually sustain. Which I understand, of course, but the answer to that isn't not to do it and to like run away. It's to learn boundary setting, So you say like, I can do this thing once a month and I can't do more than that, or you have to make it okay for people to say no. So I think there's these two sides of it: be needy and set boundaries that we just don't know how to do, and it's a deep-seated like cultural failing.
Firstly, thanks, Emily, for this fantastic discussion and a compelling book, and for your distinction between carers, care workers, and caregivers. That actually was really valuable. Just to pick up on the point you made about the issues of care that are cross-cultural, one of the issues that I've come across is a lot of families who are immigrants from the global south, the ones who are entitled to public funds, because the NRPF stuff is an entirely different type of fish. A lot of the alternative views of the family that are different from what is seen as the norm in the global norm, such as family members collaborating to provide care, is often leveraged as a sort of instrument of control in some relationships that further make these caregivers feel guilty to actually identify as carers publicly and seek some support, whether it's benefits or care allowance or anything else. How do we then square that circle of these situations where people who need support from the state are feeling ashamed to do so because of this guilt of being complicit in this atomization of care, because of that bizarre leveraging of these family relationships against someone's own interests?
Thank you. That was a brilliant question, because and it is actually
it's going to be slightly challenging to no yeah no sure. Yeah.
Is that helpful?
Yeah, that is.
So in lots of countries and cultures, it is the requirement on women to provide care is kind of leveraged as like a cultural obligation, a status obligation, an academic calls it. That if you were then to say, I need help, and to seek support from the state or wherever, you would be kind of like acting against the culture and be almost like an unacceptable female, actually, in a lot of cultures. Yeah, so it is something that happens here as well, but it's less pronounced. So when you look at the uptake of carers allowance, for example, it's way lower than it could be, and lots of people, I certainly wouldn't have called myself a caregiver until quite far into looking after my mum. It just hadn't really occurred to me because things were just happening, if you see what I mean. We were saying before we started the event, in an ideal world, it wouldn't be necessary to like label it, right? Because everything would just be set up for the fact that everyone's providing care. But one of the, so I mean, I think the answer is like community-based engagement, to be honest with you, because I don't know if you've read the book, but there's extensive kind of interview, and then like I looked into all their research with an organization called Carers Worldwide, who works with family caregivers in Nepal, Bangladesh, and India. And it's incredible and very emotional work where, you know, these are exactly the people who would not identify as caregivers because they're just a wife, they're just a daughter-in-law. This is what is required of you as a daughter-in-law in this culture. And if you were to suggest that you weren't okay with it, there would definitely be something wrong with you. I mean, that's true here, but also it's much more pronounced and shaping people's entire life trajectories as well. And the work that Carers Worldwide do is kind of legitimize that self-recognition and also build solidarity between the family caregivers, which I love. I really hope to go and visit some of their projects at some point because they have created these like peer support groups where they also have started pooling resources and starting like funds to help each other set up businesses and stuff that they can do part-time around care. It's amazing. But so I think it is that like actual grassrootsy type thing. That is the only, and then you start to have like leaders who are women who are caregivers and who are saying, no, you're going to have to listen to me and there's nothing wrong with me for saying it.
We had a question here.
Hi, I'm a support worker working with people with disabilities, and I've only been there a couple of months. And at first I was like really enthusiastic and I kept asking questions, and I was working with someone who was also very enthusiastic, but she kind of went, oh, you know, I feel like that too. I have all of these ideas, but like it's not really going anywhere. The management isn't taking me up on these things, and like all the people who had like a vision or a passion or something left. And it's not like, I've heard that it's a better place to work than other kind of care organizations, but I'm wondering like what I can do / can I do anything / is there hope if I'm at the bottom of the management kind of hierarchy. And also the people that I'm working with are nonverbal and they have a lot of disabilities, so they don't have to say. But I feel like there's so much more we could be doing, but then the management is kind of not really as proactive as maybe they could be. Like I feel like we're keeping these people alive, but we're not doing much more.
Thank you. Is it a residential facility that you're working at? Yeah, so you have family visits from family members, but occasionally. Yeah, I mean, this isn't a unique problem to the sector that you're in. Anyone who's like being a junior person in a job, it's like that frustration of, you know, you have people in the hierarchy who don't want your ideas, and maybe they used to have them themselves and it got like sucked out of them, you know, by, you know, and it's the profit-making model as well. So I don't know about your specific workplace, and obviously like I can't comment because it might be that there is a particular kind of idea that they would be really keen on if you could make a business case, because unfortunately we have to make business cases for things humans need nowadays. But what I would say is if you're interested in this kind of work but wanting to do it in a good, like a way that feels, you know, the right way, there are some really interesting models around. Now I don't write loads about this because I'm focused on the family friend carers. But there are cooperative models and like stakeholder controlled models. So where, for example, you would be in a horizontal management structure, so there isn't someone above you, and you're pooling resources and you're deciding how to run it yourselves, often with family members of the people receiving care involved in the governance and running as well. So there's something called equal care co-op that you could look up. And there's also something in the Netherlands that is really highly regarded, it's very cool, called, I'm not going to try to pronounce it actually, BUURTZORG, like Buurtzorg. But it's a kind of localized, it's in lots of different local areas. So it's not a residential facility, but it's providing care in local areas, but it's all kind of devolved and run by the nurses, like sit together and like work it out together. The point being with both of those models, the people affected and involved are part of all of the decisions. with some of these places, so are the care receivers. Obviously, if care receivers are non-verbal and may have like cognitive issues, that's different. But if they're not, then it's great. So you might find there are really exciting different things that in 5 years you've set one up if you start investigating it.
I think that's all that we have time for today. Thank you all for coming and for your great questions, and thank you so much, Emily. And you'll hopefully sign some books if people would like their books signed. And yeah, if everyone can join me in thanking Emily.
Thank you much.
So if we could do the signing through in the other room, that would be excellent. Thank you.